Hello and welcome to Checking the Vitals, a podcast powered by Specialty Care. I'm Todd Schlosser, and joining me today is Dr. John Dorman, a neurosurgeon at Boulder Neurosurgical Associates, as well as chairman and founder of Bolt Navigation Systems. In this episode, we discuss how an early experience at a hospital led him to want to practice medicine, how reading a book about neurosurgery helped him decide that that was the specialty for him, and also how his rural hospital's lack of navigation systems led him to create his own, utilizing just the computing power of his iPhone. It's pretty fascinating. Enjoy the conversation. Dr. Dorman, thank you so much for joining us here today on Checking the Vitals. I really appreciate your time. I'd like to start out with a similar question to all of the surgeons that we talk to, and that is simply, what is it in your early life, young adulthood, that made you want to work in healthcare in general?
Well, when I was in 8th grade, my grandfather had a heart attack. My grandparents lived with us at the time. He had a heart attack and was hospitalized, was in the hospital for 2 weeks, was eventually discharged in good condition. But while he was in the hospital, my grandmother and I would go up to visit him. And one day we were in the ICU and they called a code, which means another patient in there had a cardiac arrest. They announced it overhead, kind of like they do on TV. Everyone rushed in there. They resuscitated the patient, got him back. And just seeing all that and watching it unfold and being in the ICU environment, that really, I think, was a turning point in my life. And that's kind of watching that and seeing my grandfather get better in the hospital, made me want to become a doctor.
So was it that you sort of internalized that this is where people go to get better and that you wanted to help those people?
Yeah. I saw not only my grandfather get better, but that patient who came close to dying, he got better. And it was just an exciting environment. And, I was just intrigued by the whole atmosphere.
Awesome. So in the 8th grade, you had that sort of pivotal moment, if you will. And then you sort of, at that point, knew, okay, I want to be a doctor. So I'd imagine through your, high school, but also early collegiate life, your bachelor's life, you are, and that's bachelor's degree, not unmarried, just to be clear. During that time, you were focusing on the sciences, right? So I'd imagine you majored in something like biology or something like that in early collegiate life, and then decided you want to go to med school, correct?
Yeah, well, I decided in 8th grade, I wanted to become a doctor and go to medical school. And then sometime during high school, I read a book about a neurosurgeon, written by a neurosurgeon, about what it's like to be a neurosurgeon operating on the brain, the human nervous system.
Yeah.
I took a neurobiology course in college, but I think it was in high school after reading that book that I decided I want to do neurosurgery.
That's interesting. That's actually very young for to decide specialization. When I talk to most surgeons, they don't know what they wanted to focus on until they were maybe a year or two away from residency, when they're doing like rotations at hospitals and they get to like shadow surgeons. It's interesting that you decided way before that step. You decided way before then to go into neurosurgery. That's interesting.
A lot of people go into medical school, they don't know what they want to specialize in.
Yeah.
Or they think they know, but then when you get into your 3rd year, which is when you do your clerkships through different rotations,
yes,
they, go through a rotation they like. They have a mentor that takes them under their wing, or they have some sort of experience. And it's really in 3rd year that you have to kind of make the decision, because during your 4th year is when you apply for residency.
Right.
So
and that's quite a process.
It's a little unusual.
Yeah. So you're in med school. In fact, where did you go to med school before residency?
I went to medical school at University of Texas.
Okay. So you were in the South, you went to med school in Texas, and then you had already decided what residency program you wanted to go into, whether you go to, cardiothoracic or neurosurgery, because that had been decided already. Mm-hmm. How did you narrow it down to your top residency programs for neurosurgery?
It's kind of difficult because you don't have really an idea of what the different residency programs are like. You kind of hear this, that, or the other, but you really don't know. So you rank them all, you go interview, you interview or at least the ones that invite you to interview.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of a matching process. Each candidate matches up their choices. Each program matches up their choices of candidates. And then there's an algorithm which matches, each candidate to their spot. And it's an early match. It's done you get your results in January, whereas most other specialties, it's in March of your senior year.
And you, at that point, enter your residency program. And as I recall, the neurosurgical residency program is sort of maybe not much longer, but longer than all other residency programs. It's like 7, sometimes 8 years if there's a research year involved. Is that sort of the track you took through that residency program?
Yes. Back when I was doing it, it's changed somewhat now,
Okay.
but back when I was doing this and I got out of med school in the mid 90s, you would do a year of general surgery.
Okay.
And then you were already matched to your neurosurgery program, but the following year is when you started your neurosurgery, but you had to do a year of general surgery and rotate through the different aspects of general surgery. And then you start your neurosurgery. And then the programs differ. Some, like you said, some want a year of research, some 2 years. Some programs you go off and do a year elsewhere, then come back.
Yeah.
So a lot of variability,
Yeah.
but the ranges are between 6 and probably 9 years.
Wow. And then sometimes, and I believe when I was reading up on you, you chose this route after the residency, which is 6 to 9 years, as you said. Some people choose to do a fellowship, which I believe you did as well.
I did a fellowship in the middle. I did a fellowship in pediatric intensive care.
Okay.
I thought I would go into pediatric neurosurgery, and the chairman of my program, I finished residency in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yeah.
My chairman was a pediatric neurosurgeon. So we did a whole lot of pediatric cases. In the end, I decided not to pursue pediatric neurosurgery because, one, you would have to do yet another fellowship. And number two, I didn't want to really live in a large metropolitan area. And if you do pediatric neurosurgery, you really kind of need to be in a large metropolitan area with a children's hospital.
Yeah.
I wanted to be sort of in a smaller town, which is where I ended up going after residency. So that's, why I chose, not to do pediatric neurosurgery.
But you focused it on what I'd imagine is general neurosurgery. Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
We did a lot of spine in my residency program. So, I do a lot of spine surgery. Right now, my practice is 70% spine and 30% cranial.
Yeah.
That's about average for most general neurosurgeons. That breakdown is about average.
I didn't realize it was about 70-30. I knew there was a breakdown because early on in talking to surgeons, I was under the assumption that I think most of the public probably is too, that neurosurgeons focus on like the brain and brain issues and stuff like that. But it is much more than that. It's, as you said, it's 70% more than that in that spine realm, which makes good sense to me that, once it was explained to me, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But it's just one of those things that's not obvious, I think.
Yeah. If you think about it, more people have neck and back issues than they have brain issues. And so the reflection of that breakdown is really just a reflection of the pathology that's out there. It's not that I want to do 70% spine. It's just, that's what there is. That's the breakdown.
Yeah. That's what's coming to you as a sort of business owner and surgeon yourself. Right.
Right.
So over the course of this career that you said you got out of med school mid 90s, late 90s, and you've been practicing sort of since then, what have you seen change innovation wise, whether it be machinery, whether it be technique, in your neurosurgical realm? What are some of the big changes that you've seen over the course of your career?
I think the technology is, progressed to the point where in surgery, in neurosurgery and spine surgery, cranial surgery, and in general surgery as well, you see a lot more application of computers, what's called navigation. The innovation in the spine space, years ago used to be what's called implants, putting in pedicle screws or plates in the spine. And a lot of the technology at that time was made in incremental improvements on the hardware, the different screws and the sets like that. But Now what you're seeing is navigation. A lot of these different companies have navigation platforms, and those are designed to help the surgeons put in screws. A lot of the surgery I do, and most spine surgeons, involve fusing the spine, putting in implants, either for fractures or for degenerative changes, degenerative disease, cancer. And so you fuse the spine by putting in these implants, these screws, these rods to stabilize the spinal segments.
And you're talking all of this in the context of navigation. I'd imagine that where you place those screws is vitally important, because if you're an inch or maybe even smaller than that, like a millimeter off, you could do irreparable damage to someone's spine. So where you place those screws has to be vital.
Yeah, you have to be, it's millimeters of accuracy.
Yeah.
If you put, they call them pedicle screws because they are placed down the pedicle and into the vertebral body. But if you are off, if you go too much in one direction or too much in the other, you can hit a nerve root, a blood vessel,
Sure,
cause a lot of pain, disability. I mean, it's a problem.
yeah.
And so when this operation was first being done, the surgeons would only have x-rays available to them. And they could get one dimension. Like if you imagine, if you're looking through the side of the patient, you can see whether you're too far towards the head or too far towards the feet.
Sure.
Imagine you're looking through the side of the patient. You can't tell if you're too much towards the midline or too far lateral. You don't have appreciation of that.
Yeah.
And so that's where the tricky aspect comes in. And that's where these navigation systems are designed to help surgeons place that. They first started using it in brain surgery, and then it was adopted to spine surgery.
Yeah. And I imagine that, from what I understand, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, because you are very much the expert on this, navigation in its early days started around the same time you were getting out of school, right? Like it was starting to come on the scene in early 2000s, I believe.
Yeah, where I did my training, they got their first navigation system in, I think, 2000 or maybe 2001.
Okay.
I finished training in 2003. So it was towards the end of my training that they got their first navigation. And it was for the brain surgery only.
Okay.
Not for spine.
Which is, again, like you said, like 30% of what you guys do there. So, I mean, not that it's not vital for brain surgery too, but it's not hitting the bigger segment of what neurosurgery is done, right? So when did it start to shift to being both for the brain and the spine, navigation speaking?
What they do for the brain is whatever body part you're navigating, the brain, for instance, that portion, the head, has to be fixed in space. It can't be moved.
Right.
So in the brain, you can put a clamp on the skull and you can clamp it down. And they've been doing that for, 50 to 70 years.
Sure.
The spine is a little different. You don't clamp the spine onto anything.
Right.
So what you have to do is you have to put what's called a reference marker on the spine. So it's a little bit different. So what these systems do is you attach a reference frame to a part of the spine. Then you do a CAT scan in the OR with that reference marker on it. Then the CAT scan is registered into a machine, and then your instruments are registered into the machine. And then the cameras see your instrument relative to that reference marker. Okay. And that's how it knows where the instruments are. But if you accidentally bump that reference marker and move it even by a millimeter, you got to start the whole process over again.
Oh, wow. I mean, because as you said earlier, millimeters of accuracy can mean successful placement or long-term, degenerative issues or disability issues, right? Mm-hmm. So that is of the utmost importance, being that patient care is of the utmost importance. Patient outcomes is the utmost importance, right?
Right.
So as you mentioned, in 2003, when you finished your residency program or, started practicing on your own, you saw that shift in navigation going from just the brain to brain and spine over that next few years. How has navigation changed in the past, let's say 7 to 5 years, in the late teens, early 20s?
It's becoming more prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
The technology, say, for the spinal navigation, it's not a whole lot different than it was, say, 15 years ago. It all involves an intraoperative CAT scan. It involves a reference frame. It involves cameras,
Sure.
and they're expensive. The list price is about $1 million per system.
For one machine? For one
Yeah,
navigation machine? Wow. Okay.
that's correct.
So if you're
And
running multiple operating rooms at your hospital, that's $1 million per operating room.
well, yeah, but most hospitals only get one. So if you have
Okay.
two surgeons who need it at the same time, it's too bad for one of them surgeons.
Right. Okay.
They don't have it. And the smaller hospitals can't afford it. A lot of countries outside the US can't afford it.
Okay.
So, it was about 2014 that I thought that I would try to create my own navigation system.
Yeah.
To try to, bypass some of these issues that you see.
So was it that issue of need for rural hospitals or hospitals outside the U.S. for them to have navigation machines that they simply can't afford or don't have the support staff to operate and maintain or run? Was it that need that you saw that made you want to delve into that space?
Not initially.
Okay.
Initially, what happened, so our hospitals, I was out, I practiced in 2 hospitals in West Texas.
Okay.
Neither one of them had a navigation system at the time.
Okay.
It wasn't in their budget. So one of my other passions is programming. So I do a lot of programming.
Okay.
So I program apps. I put them on the App Store.
Sure.
Every program I've ever made is sort of to meet my own need. My first program, for instance, was a mortgage calculator. I was, my wife and I were house hunting.
Sure.
On the App Store, didn't see any mortgage calculators I liked, so I made my own and put it on the App Store.
That's awesome.
And then I made an app to help my kids practice the piano. Then I made another TV app, OS app, to help them get ready for school. So all these apps were I enjoy programming, I enjoy creating these apps, but they're all to meet my own need. So one day I thought, well, what if I could use the gyroscope on the iPhone to help place pedicle screws? So I figured I could just measure the medial lateral angle, with a protractor or whatever, write that number down. And then when, 15 degrees or whatever, and then use the iPhone against my instrument. And when it's at 15 degrees, I have my angle.
Right.
So then I said, well, what if I took a picture of it? And then I used finger touches and drags to get the angle. So I started programming it. And of course, it was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be. That's kind of the way a lot of these things we start.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have sort of a naivete and an optimism of, how fast you can do it. And of course, it ends up being much more difficult.
I can't tell you how many projects I've started and thought to myself, oh, this will be easy. And then it totally is not.
So that's the way it was with this.
Yeah.
But I programmed it, I made it, tested its accuracy to make sure it was indeed accurate, then took it to the OR and used it. And then in the OR, I found some issues with maybe the interface or the usability.
Sure.
So then I, back to the computer, make some more changes and sort of going back and forth, iterative process, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Finally got a really good product, I thought, that would give me the medial lateral angle. And then a year or two, I added the head foot angle. And so basically you take, pictures of a lateral X-ray in the OR, you take a picture of the axial CT or MRI, and you use those angles. You do your planning, and then you have a full-fledged navigation system. So once I got it to where I liked it, I applied for a patent. A patent was issued. And then after the patent was issued, I felt more at ease at talking to companies about it.
Absolutely. Do you mind if I ask a few questions around that process? Just as I've never talked to anyone who has done quite what you've done here. So I'd love to dig into some of this, if that's okay. First off, if you don't mind me asking, when did you find time to learn to program when you were going to school and learning to be a neurosurgeon? And how did you develop that skill set?
Well, I didn't do any programming when I was a resident.
Sure. I can't imagine you had time. That's one of the reasons for my question. Yeah.
I didn't really start, I waited till I was in private practice, waited till I had passed my boards, because that takes a lot of time as well.
Yeah.
And then I've always been sort of an Apple fan and would pay attention to their keynote speeches and stuff like that. The keynotes where Steve Jobs, for instance, introduced the iPhone back in 2007.
He was famous for always having, oh yeah, just one more thing. And then he would announce something huge. Yeah, absolutely.
Master presenter and a master showman. Then Apple started doing their keynotes at their WWDC conference, which stands for Worldwide Developer Conference.
Yeah.
So, I would pay attention to that, but never went. And then 2012, I decided to go. I understood the keynote, but then all the conferences after that, I had no idea what they were talking about because it's for developers. It's about programming and frameworks. All I knew at that point that I wanted to start programming. I remember when the iPhone came out in 2007, and then they opened it up to third-party applications in 2008.
Yeah.
So, I took a stab at it in 2009 to try to start programming, but really dove in too deep. I was way in over my head. I had no idea what I was doing. So in 2012, I went to that conference. One of the attendees there pointed me in the direction of an institute. It's called the Big Nerd Ranch in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay. Yeah.
And the BNR, their acronym, they publish books. They have courses that you can go to. They also send their instructors to other corporations.
Oh.
When Facebook decided to go from desktop to mobile, they had BNR instructors come to their campus to teach them iPhone programming.
Yeah.
So I bought one of the books, started from the ground up, like with the real basics, and started working through it. And it took me probably 9 months of that before I could start programming. I went to one of their courses. My wife gave me as a Christmas present a certificate to one of their courses. I went out there for a week and learned a little there, but most of my learning was from their books.
That's amazing that you would have time to do what I'm assuming is a very busy job of being a neurosurgeon and pick up this quote unquote hobby, because it's no longer a hobby, I'll say. But at the time you were sort of a hobbyist programmer.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you found the time to do that. But let's jump ahead a little bit, because you saw this need for and maybe this is not the right term to use, but the democratization of navigation systems. And I say it that way because so many people have a smartphone, right? I have mine next to me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have an app, I'm assuming it's an app just because of your background in that I can download and have a navigation system with me, I don't have to then spend $1 million to have one in the hospital. Is that sort of the market you're going after? I mean,
that's exactly right. So, going back a little bit, neither hospitals that I worked at had one.
Right.
So now all of a sudden I had navigation, at my disposal. Was huge. Then after I got the patent, I'm like, if I can use this, other people can use it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a lot of hospitals, mid-sized, smaller hospitals that cannot afford this. So then the next big step was getting FDA approval. So I can use my navigation system because I made it, but I can't sell it or commercialize it. I can't make it available to other people because it's not FDA approved.
Right.
So that's a whole nother process. So in 2019, after I started talking to some companies, I was put in touch with my now business partner, Patrick West, and we had a few conversations over the phone, but then he flew out to Midland to see it in use, and he was impressed, and we joined forces. He used to be vice president of sales at one of the larger spine companies.
Oh, okay.
So he's, I can program and put in pedicle screws, but I don't have the skill set, to take this to commercialization. I don't have those abilities.
Right.
And he does. So we joined forces in late 2019, early 2020, and started applying, getting the pieces in place for submission for FDA approval.
Yeah. And I'd imagine that is a process, I'm sure it's still ongoing, but is quite rigorous, because it sort of needs to be, right? Because it's very important that the things that are being used in surgery are effective and useful, right?
Yeah, it goes back to what, we were talking about earlier, how you think it might be sort of hard, but you don't realize how hard it is until you start.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The stuff that we have to go through is just unbelievable. The testing, not only of the software, but the usability, packaging. We have to make a special case for it that has to undergo testing. It all has to be documented. And so it takes a lot of time and a lot of money. So
sure.
Our plan is to submit for FDA approval in the second quarter of this year.
Oh, okay, so pretty soon it sounds like. So since 2019 is when you've been sort of ramping up to submitting for FDA approval. Do you know how long it takes? Because that's about 2 years, right? Do you know how long it takes?
Oh, yeah. How long it take would be about 9 months.
Oh, you mean once it's submitted, it takes about 9 months to get approval?
Months.
Okay, that's a little bit quicker than I thought it would be, to be honest with you. I was afraid it might be, you do 2 years of prep work and it might take 2 years of FDA looking at it and sort of approving it. So that's pretty quick.
Yeah, it should be about that time period. And this system, to bring up a point you made earlier, it definitely democratizes surgical navigation. It makes it available for smaller hospitals, for outpatient surgery centers. Surgery centers are not going to buy $1 million piece of equipment.
Absolutely. I didn't even think about that, but absolutely. That makes complete sense.
And spinal fusions are starting to go that direction. More and more of them are being done in the outpatient surgery centers. And that trend was already in place. And then COVID hit in 2020.
Yeah.
And that just accelerated the trend more.
Yeah.
And the smaller countries that don't have the resources of the US, now they're able to have navigation systems at their hands. We've already been approached by people in South America, in Europe, in Asia, to use this system. Now, unfortunately, we have to tell them not yet because we don't have FDA approval, but the interest is definitely out there. There's huge interest.
How long does it take from FDA approval to, it being in hospitals around the globe? Like, do you have a ramp up period in place for that?
Yeah, we do. So we are doing a ton of work getting ready for FDA submission.
Sure.
Once we submit it, our focus will shift entirely to getting a sales force and start to ramp up to get it out there.
Yeah.
It's like studying hard for a test, and you take the test, and then you're in limbo for 6 weeks waiting for your results to come back.
Yeah.
So we will find ourselves in limbo for that situation as far as FDA, but we've already started redirecting our efforts, in fact, towards getting it out there. So once it's FDA approved, we will have the pieces in place to get it in the hospitals very soon.
If I can ask, though, if people hear this and are interested in it, is there a place they can go to get more information about it? Knowing it's not yet FDA approved, but, maybe where they can sign up to get notified when it does get approved, or, sign up for like a mailing list type of thing. Is there a place they can go to get more information and sign up for that sort of stuff?
Yes, at Bolt, BOLTNAV.com, boltnav.com.
Excellent. Yeah. So just go there and
there's a sign up form. Like if you want more information, you can enter your stuff and we will contact you.
Excellent. I'd imagine that there are a lot of surgeons out there that are looking for something like this because their hospital simply can't afford a full-fledged, and I say full-fledged, fully meaning just the older version of navigation machines.
Right.
So we've thrown around the phrase democratization of this navigation software, right? Or navigation system. What are the patient implications of everyone having the ability to have navigation on their phone?
Well, it's going to be great for patients. There's patients out there in different parts of the world that don't have access to the same standard of care that you and I do.
Sure.
We in this country kind of take it for granted that if we need a spine fusion, we're going to get a spine fusion, and maybe and most likely the surgeon doing it will have access to navigation. But in most countries, they don't. There's just no way. And this will allow those patients to get that standard of care, both in smaller hospitals in this country, as well as hospitals worldwide. And it doesn't require us shipping by freight a large $1 million piece of equipment. We send them an iPhone. I mean, you can put it in your cup holder on the way to work. That's my navigation system.
Yeah.
And they have access to that. And the training, the training will be a lot less. If you want to use a large navigation systems, you have to fly to a certain city for like a course to do this. We've already had surgeons be trained on this as part of our studies. It takes less than 30 minutes because everyone knows how to use an iPhone.
Yeah.
And our accuracy studies, we've done benchtop testing. The accuracy of the Bolt system is better than other legacy systems that are on the market now.
So it's better, it's cheaper, it's smaller, it's lighter.
And less radiation exposure. That's another point I didn't make. You don't have to have an intraoperative CAT scan. So all kinds of benefits.
So I'm smiling a lot just because it's the connections in people's lives that lead them to doing something like this, to me, is very interesting. And that's one of the reasons I like talking to people in your position who have created these sort of innovative things, because you were a neurosurgeon and you had a hobby for programming apps. And then you went to a conference in 2012 or early 2000s. And that led you to seeing this need of navigation. And now you're about to go to market with, once FDA approves it, with this, I think it's fair to say, world-changing innovation. And it's just interesting to me, the steps along the way that led to where you are now and where you're going to be in 6 months and where you're going to be in a year and where people around the globe are going to be in 10 years because they're going to have access to this in any country that can have an iPhone, which I don't know of a place that wouldn't be that. It's very, very interesting to me. And I just want to thank you for joining us today on Checking the Vitals to talk about it, because I found this conversation fascinating.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an exciting journey. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. John Dorman. Again, if you want to check out the Bolt navigation system, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's boltnav.com, where they can go to get more information about it.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you for listening to Checking the Vitals. If you enjoyed the content we provide, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. It really does help people find the show. And make sure you subscribe so you hear our interviews with healthcare innovators every Monday.